All right, good afternoon. Yeah, some of you had me for economics, so fast trauma coming back. All right, so here's you had the reading, but I'm gonna try to make this short, and I want to actually hear from you. Even if you haven't done any economics, I have one simple question for you. Well, not that simple. In your opinion, would you say that war is good or bad for the economy? From the economics perspective. So we're not looking at war in terms of more moral perspective. We're not talking about those aspects of it. Purely from the economics perspective, what is your intuition? What kind of argument can you give whether it's good or bad? Yes.
I've heard that it used to be profitable, but over time, as of recently, it hasn't been too profitable, from what I've heard.
So before it was good for the economy, now it's not anymore.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
I guess it depends also on the location. For example, the United States, which has been at war but never on its own ground, has often made millions off of war. And that's why they became the biggest economy after the Second World War. But for example, Germany, Britain, which were bombed to the ground during the Second World War, well, certainly did not profit. And yeah.
That's a good point. Yes. So this is a very good nuance where the war is happening. Generally speaking, would war be more destructive at home or abroad? At home, right? Somebody here? You had a point? Sir? Yes.
I was gonna say, I think it also depends on like the type of war, because like total war, like in World War II, like all factories and like everything is all like changed to like produce. But like now, where it's like more wars on the really far away, you're not dedicating your whole country to mass production. I feel like it's probably not as economically profitable.
So you would say that the case of the World War II would be more profitable.
More profitable.
Okay. Somebody like that, yes?
Considering if you do win the war or not, what you gain from getting maybe like land in those areas that you have water in, you would, for example, you gain oil, which is good for the economy of the country that has won the war.
Definitely, yeah. So that's another straightforward observation, whether you're winning or losing, yeah, obviously. Anyone else? Somebody had Okay, thank you. So what we're gonna do is, I will make a table here. As you notice, there are both aspects of, I would say, the positive and the negative. Okay, so the impacts of war in the economy. So one of the points that you say is resources. Can some country win resources through war? It's possible, right? If you're winning, of course, right? I mean, a good case of that would be, think of the U.S. invasion of Iraq, right? Can a country lose resources in war? Yeah? So resources also. So what kind of resources do countries lose in war?
Human.
Yeah?
Mainly profit would be, for example, Germany had to pay back for the losses of the war to,
The reparations?
yeah. So that is like loss of like in the economy in Germany.
So that also relates to another point. Yes. So do you guys know what we call human resources in economics? The term for it?
Labor.
Labor. Yeah. So you've seen the cartoons where the cat is looking at the bird and sees roasted chicken walking. So economists see people like labor walking, right? So that's how we say it. Yeah. So what else? Now one of the things which is a positive, some of you mentioned World War II. If you guys know, we were in the second. There was the Great Depression before the Second World War, and most countries came out of the war came out of the depression through the war. So part of one positive impact of a war is that it generates a lot of government spending, and this government spending creates a lot of jobs. All right. Although this is relatively a short-term phenomenon. Now here's the thing. Whenever the government spends a lot of money, what happens in the long term? The government incurs a lot of debt, right? So that's going to create a lot of debt for the government, all right? Now, one major negative for the economy, especially if the war is happening at home, is instability, uncertainty, and instability. And this one, I would say this is a long-term phenomenon. It's a long-run phenomenon. The debt is also long-run. And the thing here that you have to think about, especially think of investment. if you think of industrial investment, financial investment, a lot of them involve a lot of long-term planning. And if your country is in war, if you have absolutely no certainty about whether to start a business or not, whether to expand a business or not, construction, those decisions are long-term decisions. And if the country is really in war, again, not away somewhere else, but if your country, your home, like next to you, there are bomb shells coming all the time, that's going to really affect the investment decisions. All right. Now, one thing that is a very determining factor in terms of the positive side of the war is investment in capital-intensive technologies. All right. And this is also a long-term phenomenon. It's quite interesting, guys. Think of any technology. What was the first use of any technology? You see, think of nuclear power. What was the first use of nuclear power?
The bomb.
The bomb. Think of radio technology. Do you guys know where radio technology comes from? Radars. Yes, Second World War radars, right? Think of the internet. Do you know who developed the internet? U.S. military. Do you guys know who is the biggest investor in AI? Armies, right? Now, how can you explain that? So, you get really one. Think of duct tape. Something as simple as duct tape. Do you guys know where duct tape comes from?
The Army one they used to patch up helicopters or rotary wings.
And also installation, yeah. So it also comes as, so basically, and think of chemistry. The knowledge of chemistry, the knowledge of biology, it was advanced through looking for chemical and biological weapons, right? Now, does that make sense? Why is it that technology and war and technology and army are so correlated? Can you make logical sense? Yes.
It's like creating you coming the first spot, basically, you being in power. The greater power that you have through technology and AI and investment in those categories, the more power you have over other countries and economies.
Absolutely. You want to have that advantage. You also want to ask her?
Basically
Same thing. You want to have that cutting edge. You want to have this is a matter of survival. You want to have some advantage over the other. Now here's the neat thing that I want to leave you with. This technology, think of the nuclear bomb. You develop the nuclear bomb, the war is over, you don't need the bomb anymore, but the knowledge of it stays with you. And you can recycle that knowledge. So what happens is that the knowledge of physics, chemistry, whatever it is, after the war it gets recycled. So the radar turns into radio, right? The internet first is for the army, but then it has these spillover. These are spillover benefits of war, right? Which enhance the lives of all of us. All of us are benefiting, really. All of us are benefiting from things which were developed to kill people, right? Or to whatever, either defense or attack, right? That's the fact of it. Again, economically, we don't make value judgments, but that's the fact of the matter. It's no surprise that the U.S. has the strongest army and is the leading in technology, and you see that correlation. All right. So I'm going to leave it to that. Thank you for your patience.
We have a question for Ahmad. Yes, Sean, go.
Yeah, I was wondering, we know that we established that war often brings out many beneficial technologies, and that's a factual good point, if you will, of war, but do you think it would be able to reach that state of competition and bring out that cutting edge in other front than only warfare, so we could get rid of the negative parts, keeping the good ones?
Thank you. That's a very good question. May I ask, what is your intuition?
Well, I think, like you said, I think you brought out a good point that the fact that it's about survival of a state or even a people often brings the best out of research and everything, but I think, especially in economics, like we discussed, there's often that competition, and I think people could achieve those technological breakthrough fighting over something that's just not killing each other.
Yeah, thank you. Economists have done a terrible job predicting the future, so I'm not going to try to do that. But I'll leave you with one distinction. You might have heard of it. Have you heard of zero-sum versus non-zero-sum game? that is a very useful distinction. War in general has this zero-sum mentality that either we win or you win, right? Non-zero sum would be trade. Think of trade. In trade, both sides benefit. It's involuntary trade, right? So if the competition and market, a competitive market is a form of fighting. Competition is a form of fighting, but it is voluntary fighting, and it's competition and cooperation at the same time. So I would say if it's possible to think in terms of non-zero sum kinds of interactions, then it's possible to have an alternative to that.
Thank you very much. Do we have a question for Rosemary? I have a question for Ahmad. Ahmad, I'm going to ask you to comment on this quote. I'm somewhat paraphrasing it from the author Arundhati Roy. She says, we used to make weapons to fight wars, now we create wars to sell weapons. I love the fact that he thinks, you know? And then he bounces it back to the person asking the question.
What do you think? We used to make weapons to fight wars, and now we fight wars to sell weapons, something like that?
Yeah, we used to make weapons to fight wars, now we create wars to sell weapons.
The way I would see it as an economist is that in the first part about making weapons to fight wars, that is the state where the war is a bottom-up process, where the war happens and calls for weapons. So the demand comes from the war, which requires weapons to satisfy that need. The second model corresponds to a top-down society where you have strong lobby groups, such as the military industry, which it is in their interest to instigate conflict so that they can sell more, right? And that is exactly the economic sensitivity that we have, that when power is concentrated in the hands of either governments or corporations which are too big, then what you get is this top-down approach of imposing one's interests at the expense of others. Whereas when the power is dispersed among multiple agents, then it's in their interest to cooperate together and all of them to benefit. And again, that comes down to the non-zero sum scenario. But that's the way I would say it.
I'm going to ask you a question which you unlikely have the answer to, because it's a very difficult. What can we do if we have these centralized power groups that profit from conflict? How can we dissuade them or give them something else to do? If it's not a grassroots issue, if the conflict is not a grassroots issue, but it is these corporate elitists, let's say, then how do we address that? How do we get out of war? How do we get out of conflict if they have a vested interest in conflict for profit?
So I have two answers. One of them goes beyond economics. One of them is the whole issue of concentration of power, which goes back to Montesquieu and the whole idea of division of power. It's always a conflict politically, because power tends to concentrate. Whatever you do, it tends to concentrate. So that is a challenge that we, as humanity, have been practicing with that all the time. If you look at and it goes a little bit beyond economics, but if you look at the founding fathers of the US, they were very sensitive about it. And yet now you see the US being basically a lobby country. My second point, which is a little bit more hope, is I would ask all of you to think about the European Union. Europe is a continent which used to fight all the time. The countries in there were fighting all the time. And ever since the Second World War, there hasn't been any war. I mean, now the recent crisis in Ukraine that is outside the EU, that is very recent. But before the Second World War, they were fighting all the time. But when they got together through a free trade agreement, then it was in their collective interest, each of them, selfishly, to actually make peace with each other. So my advice as an economist is free trade, because free trade brings people together, and the EU is a very clear example of the success of being able to terminate war between conflicting nations, people that really hate each other. Well, think of the French and the British and the Germans, all of those guys. they stopped it because it's in their interest to cooperate. I don't know if I should take that.
Sure.
Yes.
I was wondering if you think using like as an example of like during the beginning of free trade, basically when they used to take going from China and all the way to the EU, would you say like from now till then, which one do you actually think, as your perspective, is a better form of trade?
Sorry.
Like
what are the options?
which one do you think was a more effective or like a good for everyone form of trade? Back 2,000 years ago or now in a way?
Well, I don't know if the comparison is even applicable. The case of free trade is applicable to when you have states which can impose trade barriers. Right? Back in the days, we didn't even have nation states, so the idea of free trade doesn't really have an equivalent back in history. So I don't know if you can make that comparison.
I have another question for Ahmed, if you don't mind. Because we were talking about how the capitalist system represses our natural empathy. And then Rosemary said, yes, let's get rid of capitalism. And I saw Ahmed cringe. So I'm curious to hear Ahmed's response. So is capitalism good or bad? Is there another way to understand capitalism? Can we have a capitalism that endorses and supports empathy?
I would avoid this E word.
Okay. When it comes to economic system?
No, to end this question, the problem is that for any kind of questions around capitalism, my first response is define capitalism for me. The way we use it usually is doesn't have a clear definition and it's already loaded with a negative connotation. That's not a scientific discussion anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So if a term is already loaded, you might want to avoid using it. I would prefer a free market system.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times we are bundling things. If you want to learn about capitalism, you probably want to go to people who advocate it. I would say Milton Friedman, my hero, who has a book called Capitalism and Freedom. So the name, if you ask most people what is capitalism, probably they would give you something around the idea of it's all about money and it's all about corporations. Whereas that's not what capitalism is. You would define capitalism based on free trade. It's the whole idea of decentralizing power, economic power, through the free market. All right. So, could you repeat? How would you define it if you have an idea of what capitalism is?
I think your point is very well taken. We need to define our terms before we can discuss them. So the system that is, let's say, keeping our better nature from developing is not necessarily capitalism, so you're saying that it's some sort of bastardization of capitalism that we're living through, as you understand capitalism. What is the system that is do you think there is a socioeconomic system that is keeping us from being our better selves?
What I would suggest is the important thing for all of us is to prioritize our values. And if you think of before getting there, I want to add something. Maybe all of you. There's a very nice, a very short YouTube clip that I suggest all of you to watch. It's called the Pencil, the lesson of the pencil, by Milton Friedman. He talks about how a single pencil, the way it's made, brings people of very diverse backgrounds together in a peaceful manner. So how this idea of a free market promotes peace and cooperation. Right? I don't know if we should take that.
Go for it.
Go ahead.
Yeah, what about the Nordic countries like Sweden or Norway, right? They have a capitalistic system, but they still have like the best social systems as well, so they were able to combine both capitalism and like social institutions to get the best system.
So the Nordic model is very interesting. You have to keep in mind that the Nordic model is also a mixed bag. They have a lot of, first of all, you have to look at them. There are 5 countries, the Scandinavian countries are 5 countries. They have similarities, they also have their differences. The country which seems to be top of them would be Sweden. You have to look at it historically. They had their main progress was during the decades where they promoted free trade the most. The way they are promoting startups, for instance. But they also have a very heavy taxation system. They also have a relatively homogeneous society, which is very different from what we have in Canada and the US. Some of the equilibrium that works in those countries may not necessarily work for us. But that's an intricate subject. Let me just go back to the idea of values. What I tell my students is that can you prioritize, can you have an objective way of what is the top value? Think of all of the different values that we have in the society. Think of equality, justice, morality, trust, all of these things. You like them, they're all valuable. If you were to prioritize, is there a way that we can objectively say that this should be the top of? Because keep in mind, we have limited resources. So at some point, we have to prioritize. Prioritizing is not an option. Now, if you think about it, what I suggest to them is that, well, look, there are a couple of ways to have an objective measure. One of them is ask people, vote. But not voting, not the artificial survey. Look at real voting, which people vote with their feet. Look at how people move from where to where. People move from what kind of society to what kind of society. If you observe people's migration behaviors, you see that people move a lot more from certain areas to other areas than backwards, right? One of the politicians in the U.S. made a suggestion that let's make a bridge between Florida and Cuba, and make it open, and see how many people go from Florida to Cuba and how many people go from Cuba to Florida. That's meaningful. Now that doesn't mean that the U.S. is a utopia at all, but it's a relative measure. You see that people always move toward more freedom and more opportunity. Another objective measure is, think of how we punish people. When somebody commits a crime, what do we do with them? We lock them up. Now if you think of a prison is not such a bad place. You have food, you have shelter, you have clothing, you have medical service, you have a lot of needs, your primary needs are met, even secondary needs are met, and there's perfect equality. Right? If equality is such a good value, go to prison. But something very important is missing, and that's freedom. So what I would say, this is meaningful. Be very sensitive about any kind of policy or suggestion which compromises our freedom in the name of equality even, in the name of justice even. Nothing should be higher than freedom.